going to discuss a few of the arguments that are launched around marijuana. Those are the polemics. Talk a little bit about the history. You know, if you've been in medicine and studied the history of medicine, these things go in waves. We had concerns about the risks of marijuana that spurred the Reefer Madness video, you know, and so these things come in waves, and I think we're just in another wave. I want you guys to understand a little bit about the chemistry and the biology of marijuana. It's kind of helpful. Then we're going to review the evidence and discuss mechanisms wherein marijuana causes harm, cannabis causes harm. I have a little mnemonic. This is what I want you to walk out with today. For the known and scientifically clear harms of marijuana. It's DDUMB for dumb. Driving, dependence, underachievement, mental illness, and then B is for bad to worse, which is the question. This one isn't quite so well proven, but the gateway drug phenomenon. Not quite so well proven, but there's some interesting literature. Then we'll talk to Nick, and we'll have our guests, and then we'll ask questions. Remember when medical marijuana question was being asked? This kind of undercuts all of these arguments that people make. So they've done studies of who actually goes to marijuana clinics. Anybody guess that it's these people with HIV wasting and these people with the terrible untreatable glaucoma? No, this is not who goes to medical marijuana clinics. They're males 18 to 54. Guess what? Most people in this age category are well. The self-report use is for pain. There's some evidence for mild analgesic. It's HIV, cancer, glaucoma that get the thing on the ballot. That's not what's being seen in medical marijuana clinics. So this is an example of kind of the shenanigans that go behind this. There's a couple studies asking people at medical marijuana clinics. I joke, and it's not funny, but I jokingly say, you know, I think it's harder to get a California driver's license than a medical marijuana card. Now here's a philosopher, Bob Marley. He said to make marijuana against the law is like saying God made a mistake. Don't take your philosophy from someone, you know, he made some nice music, but his philosophy is a little flawed. Because are there any plants that cause harms?
Not coffee.
Well, hemlock does. Hemlock killed Socrates. Okay, so there are some plants that cause harms. Anybody recognize this plant? It's not kale, by the way. Yeah, that's tobacco. You smoke enough of it, you get cancer and die. How about this plant? Yes, thank you. You're a camper, right? Okay. So news, folks, plants can cause harms, right? We all know this. We should know this. This is an inane argument, but these arguments make me laugh. Here's another plant that causes harms. What do you know? If you were at my last talk, you know why these guys are carrying guns, is because these plants make something that if you use it enough, it makes your brain do funny things. So plants can cause harms. Here's the safer argument. Boy, do I hate this. Marijuana is safer than alcohol. Why don't we at least put it on par with alcohol? Well, actually both cause car accidents. So I don't want you driving drunk, but that's not to say that then I want you driving stoned either. So again, these are some of the arguments that are launched that drive this thing. Then there's the question of relative risk. So this is a mountain lion. I don't think you want to meet him if you're a hiker. You don't probably want to meet him. I think he's getting his teeth cleaned. Don't worry if you're an animal lover. Your actual risk of dying of a mountain lion attack are about 32 million to 1. It's actually less dangerous to blog, but you're more likely to die from falling down. And plane crashes are over here. As humans, it's incontrovertible that we're illogical when we assess harms and benefits. We're just illogical. We fear things like plane crashes, right? And heat stroke will kill you much more likely. So this is one of the, when we're talking about risks and benefits, there undoubtedly are some benefits to smoking cannabis for people. They get something out of it. This is motivation interviewing, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. But then there are risks as well, and relative risks are important to think about. I wish I could run into this sign. You know, if you encounter a mountain lion, face the lion, back away slowly, be large, shout, and then offer any handy small children. That's a tip for you with mountain lions. Roy Sullivan is a ranger who's been hit by lightning 7 times. I only point this out to say we all can think of people, again, who have used cannabis and not become an addict. Our former president was. Current president used cocaine and didn't develop cocaine dependence, but that really doesn't speak to the risk of using it. So again, the fact that a person can survive something doesn't mean it doesn't have risks. Now here's part of the tricky thing about marijuana. Everybody's probably heard this, but the potency of THC, the chemical constituent, one of the most powerful in marijuana, the potency has gone up tremendously since the 1995. And then you see drug-related ED visits from marijuana up to 2011 have gone up significantly. And compare that to, for example, heroin. You know, if you look at ED charts, marijuana is involved with more drug-related emergency visits if you search through than even handy heroin. This is the concerning statistic. One of the take-homes today is that teenagers are at high risk. Adolescents are at highest risk. If you have adolescents, tell them not to smoke. It's just not a good deal for adolescents. If they have to, make them wait till they're 18 and say there's science behind it. So here's the relative, you know, every year somebody pays the Monitoring the Future studies. You and I probably do. I think it's funded. To go and query high school students about what they've used. And in 2009, this is the most recent, actually 2011, 2010, 2009, for the first time marijuana exceeded cigarettes. Most kids get that cigarettes are a bad deal. But marijuana is that plant, right, that's less harmful than and all this. So this is a worrisome trend in the light of what I'm going to talk to you about. And then this is a fascinating statistic. This is the problem with these colas and these suckers and these brownies, is that they make it appear as if it's not, doesn't have a risk. This is perceived risk and past year use. And this curve demonstrates an interesting phenomenon. Unsurprisingly, as the perceived risk of a substance goes down, then the use goes up. And so as teens get the message that the perceived risk of cannabis is low, their use is going to go up. They're not stupid. If something's really dangerous, they'll avoid it. But when they see the colas and the suckers and the this and the that, it kind of creates this kind of calming, cut grass, pardon the metaphor, image that this is not a harmful substance. This is Nora Volkow, who's a goddess of research in substance abuse. And this is a recent article in the New England Journal of Medicine. She said the effects of a drug on individual health are determined not just by its pharmacologic properties, but also by its availability and social acceptability, right? If something is very acceptable. In this respect, legal drugs, alcohol and tobacco, and now marijuana can be added to that list in many places, offer a sobering perspective, accounting for the greatest burden of disease associated with drugs, not because they're more dangerous, but because their legal status gives more exposure. That's the fog metaphor. As this drifts into society, it's an exposure deal. Nobody's going to argue that you know, you probably, if you had to choose a substance to have an individual take one dose of, I would pick marijuana over heroin any day. But if millions of people are being exposed because of a low perceived risk, that's what we got to be worried about. And Nora says, as policy shifts toward legalization of marijuana, it's reasonably and probably prudent to hypothesize that use will increase, we're going to see this, and that by extension, so will the number of persons whom there will be negative health consequences. So this is our next decade, I think, at least, of work. We're going to be seeing a lot of this because of this. And then we're going to get this marijuana over 1 billion stoned. I think, again, this is going to be the next opiate prescription epidemic. This is a Welsh Corgi, I think. Set the bar as low as you can. My fear about marijuana, again, is the fog phenomenon, that it doesn't lead to these catastrophic outcomes all the time. It just reduces people's potential. They just don't thrive. But they don't hit that bottom that sometimes wakes people up. This one says, set the bar low enough and everyone's exceptional, mediocrity. So the question isn't, is this going to kill high school students and lead to massive car crashes and death like the opiate epidemic? I don't think it will. I think you're just going to have a lot of people who aren't achieving their potential, who aren't developing the skills and talents that they need to survive and thrive in the world. I love this one, inadequacy. When quality is too much trouble. I'm going to skip this slide. Actually, I'm not going to skip this slide because what I just said is that cannabis dependence has not been shown to increase mortality as opiate and other forms of illicit drug dependence do. So this is not a killer. I can't shock you guys by saying, look at all these deaths. That's not a killer. It's a fog. It's just going to kind of put a cap on human potential and keep people in their basements. And a wasted life is worse than death. I don't know if that's true. I'm with Walt Whitman. I don't know if death is worse, but certainly I think I'm going to present some science to show that cannabis helps stunt human potential. I don't like to quote myself much, but I kind of like this. This is an article I wrote in 2011 with this group about cannabis dependence. And I said, it behooves clinicians to remember that adolescence is an evolutionary conserved transitional stage in development, involving reorientation and activation of social and motivational tendencies. It's a transitional stage when people are supposed to kind of wake up and find their identities and things. And during adolescence, you're supposed to work to find independence, autonomy from your parents, involvement in peer and romantic relationships, and the acquisition and learning of new skills and knowledge. Anybody think of it, somebody that they've worked with, where their teen years, because they happened in the fog, they didn't develop independence, autonomy from parents, involvement in relationships, and the acquisition and learning of new knowledge and skills. This is the this is the fog of marijuana. It's not death in a parking lot because you didn't have Narcan. This is just a cap on human potential. So Nora just says that this use by adolescents is associated with increased likelihood of deleterious consequences. If you begin in adolescence, you're about 2 to 4 times as likely to have symptoms of cannabis dependence. I'm hammering this point home. I'll do that because I'd like you to remember just 1 or 2 things from today. And the adolescent brain is intrinsically more vulnerable than a mature brain. Intrinsically more vulnerable than a mature brain to adverse long-term effects of insults, such as exposure to THC. So adolescent brains are sensitive. This is a study from where they imaged brains going from 5 to 20. And everybody who's worked with me knows that, when we get somebody who's 18, I always get a little vexed because I say their brain's not cooked yet. They just don't have the machinery yet. If I ran the world, and good thing I don't, but I wouldn't even give many rights until you're 20. I would turn on the pregnancy thing and the driving thing. I wouldn't even, because you just don't have the machinery yet here to think through the future and stuff. And so, and what you'll see from the studies is if you start after age 18 marijuana, you're in a better spot than before because that's still a brain in growth, still a brain in development. And if you throw in a mental illness like ADHD, this is simply a study, just focus on the dark and the light purple. If you study the brains of people with ADHD, you can show differences in the maturation of brain circuits. So kids with ADHD or depression or whatever have an added delay, and marijuana just compounds that. And this is a brain study that makes this simple point. They showed these people happy faces, which are for most of us a natural reinforcer. They light up your reward circuitry. And what they showed is that if you put little kids in the brains in the scanner, and adolescents and then adults, teen brains respond preferentially actively to natural rewards. Things turn on teens more than others, which is cool if you want to be exploring and learning and stuff, and not so cool if you're like soaking it with the substance that you're then going to become dependent on. So teen brains are especially sensitive. I'm going to skip this. And this is a fascinating study. So if you want to see your brain off drugs, this is very cool. So everybody knows that in this thing between our ears, there's all these fibers. These are all these gorgeous rainbow fibers. Cool, huh? Like all these fibers that go all over. And then they can actually, there's a way that they can trace the different fibers, how they connect to each other. And these connections are really important. So I can have a feeling and then think about what to call it. And they showed in this study, which was in 2010, that some of these connecting fibers look different in marijuana-dependent individuals versus non-marijuana-dependent individuals.